Welcome, 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 guys. Another episode of Builders and Bosses. I am Billy Fowler. Today is Sunday, August the 10th. So I don't know if it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you all, but I wanted to say that it is a privilege to sit before you today and discuss something that's been on my mind. And this is our fourth episode, by the way. This is our fourth episode, and this has been on my mind for some time. This episode is going to be about the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. So what we do in this podcast is we read books and we talk about the authors. We talk about what the author had in mind. Now, Robert Greene was instrumental in writing the 48 Laws of Power with 50 Cents, which we've covered the 50th law by 50 Cents on a prior episode, and Robert Greene wrote that book. And this is another book. So I really enjoy the way Robert Greene writes, and I look for books that really relate to the 20th century in terms of what we're going through in our life. And so whether you're incarcerated and you're listening to this behind bars, or you are a physician or an attorney or a corporate executive or a pastor or just leader or just a normal person that found this episode and that's okay. But I wanted to really reach out to those that are in a pivotal point in their life, and you are about to go down a path that you really don't know how to maneuver. And so what you'll find through this is a very concise, precise path. And so I look at life as a game, okay? And I think that a lot of you can relate to this. And if you were to take your life and you were to create a game board out of your life, and you were to go out and get some construction paper, and you were to go out and draw, just like the game of Monopoly. If you were to draw out the game of Monopoly without all that other stuff that Monopoly has, but you would draw squares all around the board. Go out and get yourself a pair of dice. And within each one of these squares, and this is kind of how I'm going to put the framework around this book. And this book is going to turn into basically different segments, all right, different series. And so there's essentially 5 parts to this, and this will be the first part, okay? This is the first of 5 series of the 33 Strategies of War. And going back to the game board example, is with each one of the squares, you're going to put down different things that could potentially happen to your life. And the point of the game is if you land on that square, what are you going to do? What strategies are you going to do? How are you going to maneuver through those things? Now, let me give you some examples of what you would be writing in the squares. Cancer will be in the square. Death of a loved one will be on the square. Divorce will be in one of the squares. Losing a job will be on one of the squares. Losing your eyesight will be on one of the squares. Losing your legs, losing a limb would be in one of those squares. And the list goes on and on and on. And you want to create at least 30 different strategies, or for this example, 33 strategies. Or 33 squares. Because the premise is what happens if you lost someone close to you? A parent, a child, a friend, an uncle. How do you deal with that? So, and a lot of people say, well, I just need money. Money's the answer to everything. Well, you can talk to various people and they'll tell you that's not the case. They can tell you that's not the case. So I want people to be equipped, and I want people to understand what happens when you go through these things. So as we go through these slides, And if you're just now discovering Builders and Bosses, what I like to do is I like to take the books that I've read, and this is a real book. Now, people know I love to share the book. This is a book. I have it outlined and everything. So if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're watching this on whatever platform, because we're on all the platforms, or you're just listening to Apple or Spotify, you can't necessarily see the slides. But I urge you, if you are listening and you can't see, go back home, you get off work or wherever you're at, and see if you can put me up on YouTube. But this is the picture of the book. It's about $29. This is $29, $25 to $29, and I've had it for a few years, and I really enjoy this book. It's thick. You'll have to study the book, but for those of you that don't like to read but like the idea of having a book on your shelf, here's Builders and Bosses, because I go through the entire book and I'll outline the key facets, and normally I go through the entire book in one episode within an hour, but because there's so much packed into this particular book, I had to break it into five parts. And ironically, Robert Greene breaks this book down into 5 parts anyway, so it just made it nice. So let's get into this. So, all right. Now, this is something that I want you guys to really get into. You see, I'm dressed. I got my fatigues on. I got my shirt on. Again, if you guys are listening, you can't see me, but I really wanted the viewers to kind of get into, like picturing yourself going into war. All right, because Robert Greene really wanted the reader to kind of encapsulate themselves as if they're going and preparing for war. So the core idea, and I break these slides down into the core idea, the depth or the psychological depth that I want you to understand, and then also the logical takeaways. So as you see the slides, you'll see that those are the 3 to 4 main characteristics of each slide. And it kind of help me mentally get through these slides as well as I prepare for them and read the chapters. But the core idea of this book and this particular strategy, the first strategy, which is before engaging in any opponent, master the war within yourself. So whether it's, I haven't had cancer, but I know people that are going through and have cancer and overcome it, whether it be breast cancer or what have you. And people say, well, you don't know what it's like unless you go through it. So the purpose of this is to prepare for it. And so if it ever happens to you, then you'll know specifically how to try to navigate yourself through that situation. Okay? So I'm going to try to tackle some hard issues, because what I do know one thing, that in life, and I said this before in other podcasts, I know in life that people come across as caring, and they are, until you really start personally going through something. It's your true BFFs, your best friends forever. And some of us don't have a BFF, which stands for best friends forever. Some of us don't have that. Some of us out here are just by ourselves. Particularly if you're listening to this, if you're incarcerated and you feel all alone. You have to master the war within yourself. And I think that the human conflict is we all have these internal fears, these insecurities, and we're very ego driven. We have a lot of impulses, and that's just who we are. So I think we have to understand who we are first before we can start talking about the strategy and war and all that other stuff. And I'm going to use throughout this first strategy, or this first part of the book, and that's, I'm big into martial arts. I always have been. All right. And so the first thing they have you do is they don't give you some colorful belt, some nice color belt. They give you a white belt. That's to signify that you're a rookie. You don't know anything. Where everybody's walking around all these color, and you see the black belts in front of the class, and you see people orange belt, red belt, green belt, all these different nice color belts. They give you a white belt. You know why they give you a white belt? Because they know specifically that you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know jack. You don't know anything. So a lot of us, we're walking around here. We know what somebody's paying for us to do, Well, you come home and you really don't know a lot about anything. Let's just face it. Unless you go out and take a class and you study that and you really understand the essence behind that. But a lot of people aren't doing that these days. A lot of people are just going to work and they're getting paid to do what somebody showed them how to do for about 2 weeks, and then they call themselves a master in that. That's it. Okay? So that's interesting, right? That's because I mean, and part of what I'm trying to do is debunk and try to get you to understand that you got to master things. So the untrained mind becomes very unpredictable. All right? It's an ally or a dangerous enemy in high stakes situations. And so the logical takeaway here is self-awareness and emotional regulations are really the strategic clarity here. So if you don't have that, you don't have a tactical skill when you're under pressure. And I think that's the first thing you need to understand is before you engage in any opponent in martial arts or any type of situation in life, whether it be divorce or death, or the loss of, I mean, you got to understand yourself. Think about that for a minute. How many people know a lot about yourself? How many people journal? Do you journal? Do you take the time to really journal? And I think that what Robert Greene was trying to get you to see here is most people don't do that. So most people don't know who they are. Most people are not vulnerable enough to really deal with the imposter syndrome that I talked about before. And I think that until you hit that head on, when situations hit you, some people, they commit suicide. When I was working in law enforcement, there was a period, I remember a day when I worked in the maximum state penitentiary, and they had me assigned to, picture this. I'm a new guy inside the penal system. True story. Got my last name Fowler on it. And I'm like, what's going on here? I mean, they had me like in suicide watch. They said, you're going to work at Fowler, you're going to work in suicide watch. I'm like, what's suicide watch? That means you stand about 6 feet away from a cell that's closed. You have the key to the cell. This was my instructions. And your job is to make sure that this inmate does not kill himself. He doesn't have anything in there but a bed, which is a thin mattress, and a bed frame up that's not bolted to the floor. And that's it. So they walk away. And the inmate hears that. They hear the instructions. So the guy gets up out of his bed and he starts to joke with me. He says, Fowler, huh? And this is like my first day. I said, this is crazy. But anyway, and I mean, I'm not trained for this. I mean, I went to the academy, but I don't know what this is. They didn't talk about suicide watch in the academy. And I'm in my 20s. So I'm there, and they said, Fowler, you married? And at the time, I says, yeah, I'm married. And they said, well, where you live? Oh, you must live in Ohio. And I did live in Ohio. And then they started to ask me questions like, do you love your wife? And do you have kids? And he got real close to me within the bars. He started looking me in the eye. And he started asking me questions about how much I value life. And you could tell that he was emotionally disturbed and he was definitely going through things in his own mind. And he had mastered the war within himself. And I think that you could tell why he wanted to hurt himself. And he was looking for a friend. He was looking for somebody to connect with because he didn't know how to deal with life. He didn't know how to deal with things that were happening around him. And I think that the first thing before I even switch slides is you have to be aware of your surroundings, what's going on. It is important for you to journal. It is important for you to self-connect with yourself. And I think that Instagram and TikTok and YouTube has made it incredibly difficult for us to do that. And I think you have to be very deliberate and intentional and turn these mechanisms off. And you have to go out and grab a sheet of paper and just a regular notebook. And I'll show you what I use. I went to Walmart and I bought a $5.99 journal. It says journal right on it. You can see that. It's a journal. And I journal. What did I learn? When I was coming up, when I was a kid, there was a show called Doogie Howser. And every day, Doogie would go upstairs and he would write what he learned for the day. They don't have anything like that now. But that's what I do. What did you learn? Because this is your life. Most of us we know everything about P. Diddy. We know everything about anything that's going on with Elon Musk and President Trump. But we don't know anything about ourselves. We don't know jack about ourselves. It's good to read. It's good that I'm reading. But what do you know about yourself? You know, what do you really know about yourself? Other than the fact that you have learned a skill and a specific thing that you know about. Other than that, what do you know about you? What do you know about Billy Fowler? I'm pointing at you, but I'm really pointing at me. So when you point at somebody else, you got four fingers pointing back at you. So I'm saying, what do you know about Billy Fowler? And I think that, do you know how to love? Do you know what happens when you get hurt? How you're going to react to hurt? Do you know, like when you get your feelings hurt, your emotions. And I think that that's important to know. And have you debunked all that? And I think that before we go any further, we start talking about war, because that's a big deal. You need to understand who you are. Because if you don't know your development areas in your life and you only know your strengths, that's a problem. Because if I'm the enemy and I wanted to fight you, all I would have to do is ask you several questions. And then I could tell how the lack of response on certain answers, that would be an area where if we were playing chess in life, I would just focus on those areas. And I think that that's something that you need to understand, is that, whether you're a Christian or you're a Muslim or whatever, or just somebody that's not religious at all, and you're just trying to figure out how to go through life. I think that you need to understand, if you're a Christian, obviously you want to know what the enemy's thinking about, and that would be Satan. Same thing with Muslims, and I think that whether you're in the Nation of Islam or, some people out here in Georgia, and, there's people involved with, different religions, and some of it is even racist. And so, not that I'm here to talk about racism or anything like that, but you need to understand who you are. And that is the logical takeaway here, being self-aware. Because people say there's a war in your mind. Yeah, there is a war in your mind, but I think that's why I'm spending so much time on this slide. Because if you don't know who you are, when nobody's looking, all I have to do when I am looking is ask you a series of questions, and it's easy to take you down. That's why divorce is on the rise, is because we don't know who we are. I'm going to get off that. All right. So once you understand who you are, or have a good idea, because you're going to ask yourself a series of questions, is you need to declare war on your mind. So before you start talking about, I'm going to go to war with somebody else, you need to understand how you need to declare war on your own mind. And so you need to identify and dismantle thought patterns that sabotage rational decision making. Okay? Because I found that shapes the perception more than anything else. And so I think about strategic leaders must engage in what I call these mental audits, questioning assumptions and replacing reactive thinking with disciplined reasoning. And that's what Robert Greene was trying to get in the first part of the book. The first section is you got to understand what it's like to cast war on yourself. And I think this is like 99% of people. We don't know how to love ourselves. We don't know how to like ourselves. We don't go to the movies by ourselves. We don't go out to dinner by ourselves because we're too worried about what other people, me included, until I had to get to the self-realization that it's okay to date yourself, to go out and date yourself. And I think me as a man, and or you being a woman, you have to identify that. Women, they masters at this. They'll go out and they'll enjoy themselves by themselves, but men don't do a good job of it. Men don't even speak. Men don't even speak. We'll walk into a store, walk down a hall at work. We won't speak to you. And I think that's just how life is. I'm not going to change that because of this podcast. I'm just saying that you have all these things happening. I'm not saying it's good or bad or indifferent. All I'm saying is this is what I've observed in my lifetime. And so what I'm saying to you is you need to be cognitive of that. And you can't let that shape you because somebody didn't speak to you. And I think that you have to have that confidence. And I think that that's one of the things I learned in martial arts is even in that first phase of being a white belt is that people look at you like you're a peasant. Nobody really used to, oh, you're learning how to block now, or you learn how to chop, oh, wow, that's neat. That was like years ago for them. And that's just how life is. You start learning how to drive a car or anything. And so this is very, very basic. Before we get into the brass knuckles and learning how to, do what we need to do within what Robert Greene is talking about, I think I wanted to spend a significant amount of time. We're already 21 minutes into this episode, and we're just still talking about you and do you know yourself? And I think that's the fundamental aspects behind what Robert Greene was talking about, is declare war on yourself. And so because Overflow Nation is all about creating this agency where I want people that sign up they get assigned in a group. All right. And so when you sign up, you don't know the people that you're being connected with, and you're being assigned as a CEO, CTO, CFO, COO, and these are just chief level officers that stand for technical, marketing, financial, executive. That's all it is. And then you don't know what business you're going to start. You may have an idea, but you're assigned to a team of 4. And then when you get on that team of 4, you all have ideas, but then you vet it. And then you come before us with an Overflow Nation, the executives, and then we vet you. We say, okay, now let's understand your, and then we kind of do what you see on Shark Tank, but we do it more informally. And we want you to understand, but before we send you out to this world, and you got to understand who you are as a team. And so that's what this is about. It's trying to get you to connect with each other. And then once you understand that, then you can go out and conquer. So that's the next step. So step 1 is understand who you are. And step number 2 is now you have to declare war on yourself and the Overflow Nation on your team. And it's so easy to get distracted. And I think that, I think that's what your enemy, yourself, is looking for, distractions. And I think that's why TikTok can be or is a distraction. Instagram, there's a time and place for it. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I think it's funny. It's humorous to me, right? We all like TikTok and stuff like that, but there's a time and place for it. And I think that when you're trying to build something, that's why it's called builders and bosses. When you're trying to build something, there's no time for this. I built several homes, and I'm going to be building more for profit. And when I'm hiring a builder, the person that builds the actual frame of the house, they have they can't just come down and they're on top of the roof and just start watching TikTok. It's no different than you're trying to start a pizza business, or you're trying to, you're in dental school, or you're trying to, understand that next certification to do hair or whatever it is. I think that you need to understand that there's a time and place. And that's what this next, so that was the second thing. So the next thing that Robert was talking about within his book was resisting emotional sabotage. And I think that, emotional reactivity blinds strategic foresight. And it goes back to being distracted. And so neuroscience teaches us that, or it shows us that high stress emotional states activate kind of like your prefrontal cortex function, the seat of planning and judgment. It impacts that. We know that. That's what science teaches it. So you have to make sure that you understand that it blinds your foresight. All right? So there's a time and place for that. So you need to create buffers. All right? And I think that it creates more of a bandwidth for complex problem solving, if that makes sense. All right, so you need to create a buffer. And there's no other way to say that. And I'm trying my hardest to stay away from these complex words, but I think that when you're trying to build and you're talking about war, that these things become very complex. And it's hard to simplify some of these things. So some of you only see yourself as a soldier and not a general. I'm going to say that again. Some people only see themselves as a soldier and not a general. So you need to shift from this immediacy of execution to a long-term vision. Because we are, as humans, we are wired for short-term thinking. We are. And to understand strategy and requiring what it requires, the reflex to prioritize and not just have impulse thinking, that's difficult for a lot of us. But leaders who mentally rise above the battlefield as a general and not as a soldier see patterns that are invisible to those who are embedded in the day-to-day fray of being a soldier. And so you have to decide today, are you going to be a transactional person that just says, I got to go make the donuts every day? Or are you going to be the person who owns the donut bakery, the donut shop? And in your mind, if you're going through something, if you're dealing with a death, or if you're dealing with a divorce, if you're dealing with these things, you have to rise above that. And like, what's the next chapter in your life? So be it. There's strength in knowing the next chapter, but you got to overcome that. You can't just sit in that situation. It's going to happen initially, but you have to rise above that. And that's why I said to be a general, you got to think about that's why you create that board that I talked about, and then you roll the dice, and then whatever that number is, you got 33 squares on that board. It may tell you to go to square number 6. Now you landed on, you lost a child, and it just through conception. And I think that these are some tough things in life, and so you want to think about the 33 most horrific things that could potentially happen to a human being. You want to put that on your board. And I think that becomes your game of life. And you don't just want to put down, I want $1 million. Or matter of fact, you don't want to put nothing like that on your board. Nothing. Because you know what you would do ideally if you won $1 million, or if you won $100 million, or if you want a new car, or anything you want. You know what you would do. But you want to put on the board things that are horrific in life. So you can think about those things before they happen. And that's what a general does. And that's when you start thinking about war, you want to think about things that could happen to you before they happen. You start thinking about, I know people that have committed suicide because they lost their job. I've been in HR for 25 years. You can only imagine. You give somebody $300,000 a year, and that's all they've done, and they couldn't mash the potatoes anymore. They decided not to continue to get certifications and to stay up with time with AI and whatnot, and they lost a job. They were still back 10 years ago thinking about Excel, thinking about all those things. People don't like them. They don't know how to be likable, and they lost their job, and they go out and kill themselves. And so I think that's just one example. But you got the medical health and wellness issues of dealing with cancer. And I think that when these things are so traumatic in your life, and that's why I say go out, buy a hard stock construction, just like a regular game board. You can buy them online, buy them on Amazon. And then you go out and buy some tape, buy some squares, and just create your own game of life. It's called Bobby's or Johnny's or Tim's or Sue's or whatever your name is. My name's Billy. And and you put right in the middle of it, Billy's game of life. Go out, buy you a set of dice, and just throw the dice. and to play your game of life. And that's what Robert Greene was talking about. Rising above the situation before the situation happens. So when you get into that situation, because life will put you in these situations, you've already pre-thought what you would potentially do in those situations. And that's half the battle, because some people, they have not done any of that. So when this happens to them, it's so traumatic, and they end up taking themselves out by committing suicide. They kill themselves. All right? And so you have to reframe. On this next slide, you got to reframe obstacles into strategic assets. And so the core idea here is internalized struggles can sharpen and not weaken. It's more of a strategic move. Okay, so it's more a strategic move. And I think that in the basic core genesis or fundamentals of what we're trying to do here, and what Robert Greene was trying to do here, is trying to get you to understand how this works. And so resilience emerges through this. When the mind starts to reframe adversity from how it was initially given to itself as an instrument for learning and adaptation, it reduces that fear and ultimately removing that power that you gave fear. Because you can give fear power. And so you want to reduce that. And so you want to convert that emotional resistance into fuel, treating it like setbacks as intelligence rather than defeat. Okay, and so that's really what a general does. Is you want to understand how to defeat it before it conquers you. All right? Okay, so let's keep moving here. So you want to cultivate a detached perspective. All right? So the core idea here is you want to step outside the immediate drama to assess the true nature of events. And I think that detachment is not coldness. It's the ability to separate identity from momentary outcomes, preventing ego entanglement. So this distance that I'm talking about allows an accurate threat assessment, like somewhat similar to like a SWOT analysis, where you understand the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You have a clear prioritization and better understand timing and action. And so all these, I know I'm sounding very technical right now, because again, this is a 5-part series. But this first segment, you may want to, depending upon if I may have lost you already. This may be so technical, but when you start talking about what people go through in generals, what they study in war, it becomes this technical. Going out buying a journal, going out buying a board, going out buying dice, applying this, then it's going to make sense to you. And when some of you have never been incarcerated before, and you just got the word, the judge is giving you your sentence. It's 5 years in a maximum state penitentiary. This is day one. This is week. This is week one. Day one, week one. You're scared out of your mind. You don't know what you're going to do. You don't know if somebody's going to start fighting you tomorrow. You haven't even really met your cellie. You're paralyzed. But what if that's on the board? He said, why would I put down going to prison? The person that's in prison day one, week one, they didn't think they were going to be in prison a year ago. I met people that were in there for tax evasion. I met people that were in there for various things. Everybody wasn't in there for killing somebody. And so, but again, that's life. This is your life. This is life in general. Back in the day, you could get drafted without having to take some ASVAB military test. Now that's not the case. They got enough people that want to go into the military, but back then they had to draft you because they couldn't get people that wanted to go into the military. That would have been on the board back in the day. Now that's not on the board. You follow me? I mean, you have to understand how life works. So you got to come up with these things before they happen. And somebody say, "Oh, that's boring." Okay. Okay. You get in your 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. And a lot of you are in your 20s and 30s, and you may have already clicked off of this. You say, "This is boring. I don't want to listen to this anymore." But I'm going to record it anyway, because if you ever go through hard times, as we all do, I want you to have the ability to go back and listen to this. So this may be too much for somebody. Right now you're still trying to have fun. You don't want to listen to this stuff, but somebody has to talk about it. Somebody has to talk about it, and so I think that's me right now. Having gone through all the things that I went through in my life, working in a penal system, working in all the different types of positions that I've had within HR, listening to all the different things that I've been through just in my personal life, I'm well equipped to talk about these things. All right. So then next we want to get into what's called the mirror test. So what is the mirror test? It conducts a kind of a self-inquiry to expose your blind spots. So when you look in the mirror, you kind of see different things. You look in your rearview mirror in your car. There's blind spots. So you need to understand that, and you can only do that by going out and journaling as a result of the board first. But you gotta get yourself a board. You gotta create yourself a board. All right. You need to go out and get you some go to the dollar store and go down the toy section, get you one of those army men, and those are going to be your figurines on the board. So you're going to go to Amazon, you're going to buy the board that folds, that's going to be your board of life. Go out, stop for a minute, forget about Twister and Monopoly, forget about that's fun stuff. This is your life. You're going to get you a board, you're going to get you some square tape, and you can actually write on that. You can write on the tape, some masking tape. You can do that, or you can get fancy with it. You can buy your own game pieces. They had all this out there on Amazon. You can handwrite it in there. You can type it in there. You can go however you want to do. You can create labels, but you need to create 33 different squares that are traumatic, and you want to use those army people. And you can get real fancy with it. You can get very basic. You can create generals and create soldiers. You can they have figurines that just have that base on it, and you just move them as you roll the dice, and just move them every time you roll the dice. And so that's what we're doing here essentially, is we're creating a game of your life. So when you have identified a situation that you've never been in before, you're sitting in that situation. You're sitting in that situation right now. You now have cancer. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Terminal ill cancer. And yes, people have gotten out of that through chemo. But how are you going to? So you're going to think about that. You're going to think about the death of your mother, your death of your father. You're going to think about that. You're going to sit there and think about it. You're going to think about the divorce. Think about the loss of your child. You're going to think about all these traumatic things, losing your legs, being blind after having sight, losing your ear sight, losing your ear, not being able to hear, not losing your ear, but you could be losing your ear, but losing the ability to hear, the ability to smell, the ability to taste. And I think that these are things that you should think about. I haven't heard anybody do this. Maybe there is, but the whole point of this is how it came to me is at least everybody, when you read different books, it's going to hit you differently. It's going to impact you differently. But this is the way it impacted me when I read the first part of Robert Greene's book on the 33 strategies of war, is knowing how to deal with that. So this is what this is. It's basically leaders who look unflinged at their flaws can restructure habits and ultimately preempt predictable failures, so that when you get into these situations, and that's essentially going back to the martial arts, as I start going through the belts, as I start going up the ranks, I started noticing people would punch me a certain way or use their shoulder, and I would be able to have a predictable, relatable, preemptive way of blocking it each time where they fell flat on their backs. And that's essentially what we're learning in the basic fundamentals as a white belt, or is when you first land on that spot of losing your legs, you can't walk anymore. How are you going to, what kind of wheelchair are you going to go use? Somebody said, well, you don't want to talk about it because you may just cause an effect. You may speak it into your life. No, that's not true at all. Because what you're doing is you're understanding how life works. Because these things could happen. And again, going back to the first few slides, that's dealing with that emotional piece. Because what if it does happen? What are you going to do? Some people, like I said, they commit suicide. They say, well, I don't know. I can't believe I can't walk anymore. This is horrible. And then so, okay, now let's talk about that for a second. So you can't walk anymore. You lost both your legs due to whatever car accident. It wasn't your fault. Somebody T-boned you, and a semi came and knocked you out. Now I know how to drive a semi. I've owned a semi, and I know the impact that I could have caused if I hit somebody. I've never done that before, but I was always cognitive of that. And there's people that drive, all hours of the night, and they're tired, and these things happen all the time. And so what happens? And so you talk to people, and you say, man, you can have fun with it. So I'll go out and I'll join the Olympics because I'm going to get paid for my job because I have accidental disability. So I got enough money coming in. So it's not about the money, but it's about the fact that I can never walk again. Or you lost your arms. There's a guy that's on YouTube that doesn't have his arms or his legs. He's walking around and he's functional. And he's dealing with it. And so I think that as boring as this is for some of you that have all your limbs and all your eyes and all your ears and all your sound and all the ability, unfortunately, there's people out here they're not as fortunate as you to have all these things. And they've learned how to deal with it in a way that they're probably enjoying life more than you are because you're taking for granted all the things that you have. And that's really what the mirror test is to get you to identify and expose blind spots within the cancer piece, within the fact of losing a limb, within the fact, so you can talk casually about this, confidently about this. Life goes on. That's what's going to happen. Life is going to go on. You're going to keep loving. You're going to keep walking. You're going to keep reading. You're going to keep enjoying your favorite TV show, your favorite husband, wife, son, daughter. You're going to keep living. That's what's going to happen. You're going to expose the blind spots before they happen. So this game that I'm talking about is going to help you because it's your life. You're not going to go out and buy a game. You're going to understand that. And so a lot of people, I'm sure that Robert didn't probably think I was going to generate this out of the first chapter. He was trying to get you to understand business. And we'll get into that in the other parts. But I really wanted to put a significant amount of time talking about the vulnerabilities and the strategy that you can create if you know that if you lost your legs, you can go out and buy them. There's this, hey man, did you see this nice wheelchair out there? It does turns. I don't know. You see what I'm saying? You're thinking about those things before they happen. All right, let's go on. So you want to create mental mobility. What is mental mobility? It's the flexibility of thought. It is just as important as the strength of conviction. So in other words, you want to continue to keep thinking like you're thinking now. You don't want to freeze time. You see this picture here. You may have saw that movie, and they're preparing for war and boot camp because you want to deal with the things before they happen. So they force themselves into a boot camp of life so that when they do go to war, they're mentally prepared for what could potentially happen. So they have smoke bombs. They're running in the rain. They're thinking of all these obstacles that could potentially happen to them if they are in war. So they're preparing for this mental mobility so that they are ready when things happen. They got a rucksack, which is like 50 or more pounds. And so they're ready to carry things. If they got to carry another one of their soldiers, one of their teammates, all these things happen during boot camp. And that's what we're doing with this board that I want you to go out and purchase and create. And even if you don't want to go out and purchase it, you can literally draw it on a sheet of paper. You can just think about it. If you don't want to go out and purchase, you can think about 33 situations that could happen to you. And take some time to think about it. Just you, nobody else is around. And if you wanted to find a buddy or your spouse to think about it, they probably don't want to do this. But unfortunately, I've dealt with these situations being in human resources more times than I didn't want to. Over 2 decades, I've had people that have had situations where they've come to me and now they've lost or they've gained and they don't know how to deal with it. And so I've had situations where people have called me, and they says, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm thinking about committing suicide. And although I'm not a trained counselor, being in HR for so many years, I dealt with situations that you probably never have. And I'm now I'm finding myself helping people to manage these situations in life. And so rigid thinking locks the mind into predictable patterns, which opponents can anticipate and exploit. And the opponents here are the cancerous cells, is the death of a loved one, is the failure of a business. And so when you think about these things, you start thinking about all those horrific things. When you start thinking about building a business, it becomes easy. Because you just mastered life and death of the very thing, the very link to your power in life was your dad, was your uncle, was your legs, was your wife. They're no longer here. You just mind mapped your way out of cancer. You just mind mapped your way out of if you lost your sight, you're now thinking about like 10 or 12 different things that you could, these strategies that we're going to get into. Before we get into them, you're like, at least you're thinking about them now. And so now you want to build a business? That's easy. You follow me? And so now a lot of you are trying to understand like distractions, but you don't know how to mind map your way out of a day. So what I do on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays is I don't eat. I don't eat anything. All I do is drink coffee, water, and juice. That's it. People say, you crazy. No, I'm not. This is how I'm managed. I happen to have a six-pack at 50, in my 50s. I happen to have a six-pack. And this is how I manage my six-pack. But I got here by stopping eating incrementally. So I did what is called intermittent fasting. Some of you know what that is. And it was extremely hard for me at first. I have we all have a pantry. If you're in an apartment, you can be in a studio apartment in New York listening to this. You probably got a drawer, and you call that your pantry. And I had all type of stuff. I had ramen noodles. I had juju beans. I had you name it. I had it all in there. And so it was tough. I said, what if I just started 8 hours, 4 hours? I think it's a 4-hour fast. So I stop a meal. I'd have to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But I convinced myself that I had to have those 3 meals every day. And I convinced myself that I had to have a snack in between those meals. And I became overweight. And then I said, well, let me just try to stop the snacks. And then I stopped the snacks. Then I said, well, let me just stop a meal. And then I said, what if I stop 2 meals? This is over time. And then I said, what if I stop 2 meals and then 3 meals? And what if I can do it in a day? What if I can do it 2 days? And so just one thing led to the other. And that's essentially what I'm saying here, is that you have to create this mental mobility. We just keep moving. And that's kind of what boot camp was for. And that's what Robert Greene was talking about, is you have to go through these phases. Like so step 1, if we recap, was you have to understand who you are, declare war on yourself, and then you get into this momentum that you're creating, this mock boot camp, this board that I'm having you put together, so that if these things happen to you in your life, if you roll the dice and you roll on number 7, and 7 happens to be you lost your vehicle, your car, how you gonna get to work? Oh, I guess I'll have to Uber. I guess I have to ride my bike. Guess I got to go buy a bike. All these things you just got to think about. And you do this more often than not. Maybe you just play the game once a week. I do. I play the game once a week. Just playing the game with me, and I just roll the dice. Just roll the dice. Just roll the dice. And each one of these squares, you're going to assign a number to it. And so when you roll the dice, whatever number it is, then that's the number you're going to move this army person that you're going to go out and buy. You're going to move that. Okay? And so you're going to have 2 types of figurines. You're going to have a general, and you're going to have a soldier. And so if it's a soldier, when you roll number 6 and 6 is you lost your hearing, the soldier is going to be more granular. It's going to be in the details. It's going to be in the details of what you're going to do. Are you going to go out and buy a hearing device? And if you're general, how are you going to look above the situation and above the emotional situation, your emotions? Because the soldiers are going to be thinking about all the tactical warfare involved with, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. But the general's like, we're going to keep it moving. So you're going to have the overarching theme and the granular theme. And that's what the two figurines are. So now you're approaching it from both sides. So when you do start this business, because we're going somewhere with this, we start this business, that becomes very, very, very easy. Because you're dealing with your life. And if you can deal with death and the loss of a limb, loss of a loved one, dealing with cancer and all these things, you start talking about building a business, that's easy. You're not going to get distracted because you're not going to get distracted with, you can't talk anymore, folks. You can't even see anymore. You lost your sight. You know how traumatic that is? But if you do this every single week, there's 52 weeks in a year. If you play this game every week, your mind's going to get stronger. Fasting is going to get easy. It's easy for me to fast 3 days a week. I do it like, take it off my shoes. The first day I felt like I was dying back in the day when I first started fasting. The first day, you talk to people who fast, the first day you feel like you're dying because you don't do it enough. You play the game of life, your game of life that has 33 squares on it. You're ready. You're ready. You're strong. You're able. And that's really what this is. Stay hard. I heard David Goggins say, he says it every time he posts something. Many of you don't know, but I read all of his books, and he always says stay hard. There's people out here that are pushing hard like that, and I'm one of them. I want to stay hard. All right? So you want to control the temple of your mind. That's what this is all about. Control the temple. So we talked about the mobility aspect. Now you want to control the temple of your mind. And the core idea here is to master the rhythm of thought to dictate the rhythm of action. Because there's a rhythm. There's a rhythm. And you want to slow that down. You want to master the rhythm. The only way to master it in martial art is you got to practice. You got to practice as a practitioner. Because you can sit here and think about, how many people have thought about that? How many people have thought about that, just like more than 5 minutes, like more than a minute, that if you get cancer, what are you going to do? Because you're eating everything. It says right on the back it may cause cancer. Look at Takis. They don't even sell that in Europe. It's against the law. But our FDA, our Food Drug Administration, we have passed that here. We're all about making the bucks here. We don't care. We're going to get that money in the United States. So those of you who don't know, that's Takis. Go out and just go buy you a thing of Takis and just eat one of them. Not the whole bag, just eat one of them. See how it changes your tongue color, your everything. I don't eat that stuff. Some people call that rat poisoning in other countries. Yeah, I mean, just look at the ingredients and just chat GPT the ingredients. Just take a picture of, maybe we'll do that on one episode. Take a picture and just upload that to your phone and chat GPT, the 5th version, and then ask chat GPT to tell you in layman's terms what this can do to your health. And ask it, why does the United States sell it versus why Europe does not sell it? And you'll be shocked and amazed. But this is not that podcast. But I just wanted to inject that into this situation, is that you have to master the rhythm of thought. You got to master the tempo of how you think. Okay? Because internal pacing of your thought determines the external performance of how well you go through that thing. Rushing fosters mistakes. Rushing fosters mistakes. Stalling breeds missed opportunities. So that's why it's so important not to be distracted. So leaders set internal tempo intentionally, slowing the thought to plan, accelerating when being decisive, movement is required. So that's what this is. That's what this is. So you have to wage war without hatred. Because you can get to the point where you can hate life and you want to kill yourself because you're now divorced, or you just lost the most important person in your life, your mother or your father, and you don't know what to do. Nobody can relate to you. Nobody knows what you're going through, and it feels like nobody cares. And you just want to end your life. So you have to wage war without hatred. You got to start, because I know somebody that lost their child, and they hated God. And those of you that don't believe in God, this is hard for you to understand, but people that do believe in God put a lot of stock and inventory in God, okay? And I personally believe in God, so I know this would be traumatic to hate God. But those of you that don't believe in God, this may be a struggle for you to understand, but a large part of society believes in a higher power. And I know this particular person that I used to work with, and they said, and I'm in HR, they came to me and they said, listen, I hate to get too personal with you, Billy, but I now hate God. I don't think that God had me in mind in my best interest. And so these type of things have happened to me more often than not. And I'm the type of HR manager or HR director that I get personable with people, because I couldn't stand it when I was not in HR and I would go looking for help and the person would just be very vanilla. I said, if I ever became a leader of others, where people will come to, I didn't want to be the generic person. I didn't want to be the generic brand. I wanted to be the Michael Jordan brand, where you wanted to go and you wanted to put those shoes on because you know that meant something, to go sit in that seat. And I think that's what I have built for within my community, is people, when they come to me, at least I think that they want to get some value out of that conversation. So the core idea here is, when you talk about waging war without hatred, is that the emotional vengeance clouds strategic vision. And hatred narrows the mind's field of view, making one predictable and blind to nuanced opportunities. So the strategist uses opponents as instruments towards larger goals, never as emotional fixations. So detachment protects both clarity and efficiency. So you have to be able to detach yourself in order to see the clarity and efficiency. So when I'm fasting, sometimes I'll get very, very hungry throughout the days that I'm fasting. And I've been in restaurants because I'm in this position where I have to go out with people to eat, and they'll be eating and I can't eat. Because you said, well, you can eat. No, I said I cannot eat, because I have detached myself and I made a decision to not eat for that day. Just because you're eating doesn't mean I have to eat. Just because you're crying doesn't mean I have to cry. And so I think that you have to have that detachment. It protects the clarity and efficiency of what you're trying to do. So my last slide here, you can see these are Navy SEALs. These are our boys, right? These are the ones that you don't never see. They're very stealthful. So the first strategy, there's 33 strategies. The first strategy is declaring war on your enemies. And that's the polarity strategy. That means yourself. In order to declare war on your enemies, you have to declare war on yourself. The polarity strategy. That's the first one. So I hope you enjoyed this, guys. I'm not going to do these back to back. There's other things there's other books I'm going to be pumping out over the coming weeks. I'm going to take a bye over the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be in Vegas. I may do one while I'm in Vegas, and I'm also going to Philadelphia. So next week I'm going to Philadelphia, and the week after that I'm going to Vegas. I want to do a podcast while I'm in Vegas, but I'm not sure if I might have time. I'm going to be it's going to be my first time in Vegas, but I wanted to pump this out before I got out of there, before I left, do some traveling. But a lot of us have it made. I want to say this in closing. A lot of us have it made. We got, beautiful house, beautiful loved ones. We enjoy life. But I can tell you, being in HR for 25 years, I get that knock almost daily. And I had a situation where somebody, they worked for the company, and they didn't take time to fill out a life insurance policy that we provide our employees. And the wife called and says, listen, my husband passed away. I just want to find out what I need to do to collect the life insurance policy, the money that so I can bury my spouse. And I can't tell this story. I've told this numerous amount of times. Not the number of times that people call me and I have to tell them that your spouse didn't fill out any paperwork. They were selfish. That's what they were selfish. They didn't take the time to think about you. I don't say that. I have to come up with a story. But if you're listening to this and you don't mind thinking about your loved ones, this is another square that's on that box, on that board that I want you to write down. What type of legacy you're going to leave. So don't just think about this from your perspective, but think about it from the people that you're leaving left here on this earth. So I know it's kind of a different podcast, but it's something that's been on my mind for all these years. And I said, if I ever started a podcast, I want to make sure that I address this. So you guys have a good one, and we'll talk next time. Thank you.